everyone, and welcome to the USC Live Q&A. My name is Karen, and I'm the Associate Counselor here at Plexuss. We are very happy to have here with us a special guest, which is Dave Moniz. He is here as a USC alumni and a very important part of Plexuss, here to answer all of your questions. So I already gave like a little brief introduction about you, but Dave, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, I'm Dave Moniz. I'm the Vice President of Strategic Partnerships at Plexuss. I manage the Plexuss Prime tutoring and coaching and counseling initiatives and USC alumni. Yeah, I'm happy to be here, and hopefully we'll get some great questions. I'll share a little bit about my experience in the admissions process and going to school there.
Awesome. All right, so before we get started, I do want to let you all know about the schedule throughout this session, and of course of how this session is going to work. So I will be starting off these live Q&As. If you have been on a live Q&A before, you might be already familiar with how it works, but just to let you all know, I will be starting off with some interview questions. It's going to be a few interview questions just that I would like to ask Dave just to get things warmed up. And then while I'm interviewing, you can start to feel free to think of any questions you all might have of your own. And then after I have finished interviewing Dave, of course, and we will open up the floor for you all to answer or to ask some questions so Dave can go ahead and answer them. And I will give you all more instructions on how you can ask those questions when we get to that point. All right, so let's get started with the first question, okay?
Great.
Awesome. So first question is, what did you do in high school prior to applying to USC?
So, and I should say this is University of Southern California, not University of South Carolina. Hopefully no one's disappointed and you all stay for the rest. I spent a lot of time preparing for standardized tests. There were a few reasons for that. I finally, after my sophomore year of high school, decided to get into honors and AP courses, take more challenging coursework that I knew would look better on my transcript. And the other key thing I did was I was really lucky. I learned a lot more about the financial aid process. So I have a brother who's a year older. Neither of our parents didn't go to college. So we really didn't know much. We had no firsthand experience in the house. And I felt like college was something that rich people did, like vacations to Europe. And fortunately for me, I got to watch my brother, my family go through the financial aid and application process, see what kind of package USC offered, and also learn very specifically what things I needed to do to be competitive and make sure I could get in and get money from the school to make it affordable. So I did some extracurriculars. I was the world's worst pole vaulter for a few years. Did extracurriculars like environmental club, and I picked, and I think this is advice a lot of high school students get, but I picked a few clubs I really cared about. Environmental club was the most prominent one. And you don't have to be an officer in these clubs, but if you pick a club like I did, a few clubs that you really care about, after a few years, you're in a leadership position. I did associate student body as well. But I picked, I didn't try to do everything, didn't try to pack in a million extracurriculars, picked a few things I cared about. I think what helped me most was having a brother 1 year older so I could learn how the admissions and financial aid process worked. And the other key thing was once I realized college was a realistic option for me, I got more serious about my homework, my studies, and actually taking classes that, even though I wasn't eager to do more homework, I knew they were the classes that were going to prepare me to do college level work and look good on my transcript.
Awesome. All right. So moving on to the second question, how was your application process experience to USC?
So really weird. I think most high school students feel this way. I wasn't used to bragging about myself. I found it very awkward to write essays about why I was a great leader, and the interview process was especially weird. The interviewers from USC, they're alumni, they're very supportive. You feel like they really want you to do well, and they want to see you get in, and they want to see you get scholarships. But I was interviewing with people who I felt, you went to USC, you probably can't relate to my background as a low-income student. You probably had parents who went to college. You probably knew you were going to USC early on. So I felt really awkward in some of those exchanges with the interviewers. I just had to kind of push through it and get over it. And what would have helped me more in the application process was probably practicing those things, getting outside help maybe with my essays. I had to write a lot, but getting comfortable bragging about yourself is a challenge, but it's something that you have to conquer in the application process. And now that I've spent years working with students, helping them on the same thing, I can always reach back to that experience. But I say I was really lucky knowing that I was applying to a school where I was likely to get in, because I could compare. It wasn't just that my brother went there, it was I could compare my grades, my activities, my test scores to what he had. So that gave me some confidence, and I applied to some other schools as well, but that made me feel more comfortable with the application process than any other kid in my situation probably would have been if I hadn't had an older brother.
All right. Awesome. So we're going to move on to the next question. For this question, you mentioned in the RSVP bio about yourself that you went to USC on a full ride with scholarships and grants. So what are some tips that you will recommend to students who would like to get a full ride to college?
So I'm going to say I'm proud of USC. Go Trojans, fight on. Right now, if your family makes under $60,000 a year and you get into SC, they'll pay your tuition. You're covered. There are other schools like that today. So probably the most important thing for getting scholarships and grants is your list of universities. You at least have a foundation of colleges and universities that you're competitive to get in, and that they are the schools committed to giving families a financial aid package that'll meet their needs, so you won't have to take out loans, or if you do, they're going to be minimal, so you graduate with zero to no debt. So even if it's not technically a scholarship, it's a grant that you don't have to pay back. Start with those lists of schools. So again, USC kind of fell into my lap, but I grew up in Southern California. And then the other thing that I did, I looked carefully at the scholarship criteria, and my high school helped here. They did an SAT prep class that started in freshman year. That is too early for most students. I worked in the test prep industry for forever. I can say most kids don't want to start prepping for the SAT freshman year. But I knew that was going to be a factor in whether or not I got some of the big scholarships that I was going after. So I was more serious about it, pretty committed, put in a lot of hours. And even though I again, don't want to say that's the formula for everybody, there could be other scholarships where it's an essay that's going to be most important, or it's which classes you take, or getting a background in a particular industry. But your list of colleges is first and foremost, that's key. And then if you don't have a good list of schools that are reasonable, that are committed to giving you a good aid package, then you're just going to have to get incredibly lucky. So those other things will start to fall into place when you've built a list of good schools that are a fit.
Right, I definitely agree with that. Next question. Talk to us about your student experience at the university, such as did you have any jobs, and are there any challenges that you faced?
I can put those two things together. So I did have jobs, and there were challenges that I faced. And one of them was my first year went pretty smoothly, got good grades, had an amazing roommate. The challenge then in my second year, and so I had all the typical challenges with learning how to study and manage my time and all that. But going into my second year, I was getting my money to cover my rent and cover all my food for the semester in one lump sum at the beginning of the year. That is not a good idea for someone like me I'd never had money to budget before. So I'd never had hundreds of dollars at one time in my bank account, let alone, thousands of dollars that I was supposed to stretch out for months. So even though I was eating, like, this is USC, so Chano's, Del Taco, Taco Bell, just mostly eating fast food within a short walk of campus, it adds up. And then I would end up really struggling to eat, a can of corned beef hash and turning that into a meal second half of the semester. So after a while, I learned to budget, but that was one of the reasons why I ended up with jobs while I was while I was at school. And then I was always looking for the one or two or sometimes three jobs that I would have to work, full-time hours over the summer. But yeah, I had the campus taxi service job it was campus cruisers is what it's called now. Um, that was one of the challenges at SC. If you don't have a car, there's not a lot you can do because the neighborhood around campus gets pretty dangerous if you go a few blocks in one direction or another. So it is a challenge not having a car. And it's a challenge if you don't make friends who have cars because then you're really limited in your activities. And the other thing that makes that challenging is, especially a school like SC, right now about 15% of the students at USC are from a first generation background, meaning their parents didn't go to college. That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be low income, but it usually does. So if you're like me, you didn't have much money, or you did and you blew it all in like a few weeks or a couple months at the beginning of the semester, it's kind of hard to feel like you fit in when you look around campus and you think, man, everyone else here got a convertible for their birthday when they were 16, and they're going off on vacations, and they're driving to Pasadena or driving to the beach. So there's this sense of like, I feel like I was maybe catching up academically, but also, I mean, technically it's called imposter syndrome, where you're just looking around going, do I really fit in here? Do I really belong here? Do these other people think I belong here? And that kind of weighs on you. It can make it harder to study or harder to get motivated. So those were some of the challenges. But I liked most of the jobs I had. So there was the first job that I had going into the summer after freshman year was working construction, and getting up at 5 a.m, working a really grueling day, having other guys on the site tease me because I was Joe College, the only one there going to college, and they thought I was fancy because I went to USC, and I wanted to say like no, but working a job that's really grueling like that was one of the things that kept me motivated. Like I was maybe tempted to not go back, even though my first year went pretty well. Working my butt off in construction for the summer was motivating to go back and finish my degree. And then what I did to find jobs after that, I got smarter about it, and it was try to extend my personal network, which is something you do after you graduate in the professional world. You've hopefully built a network that you can look to for jobs as you move on in your career, but you can start doing that while you're at college. So some of the jobs I got that were a little more fun for me and a better fit, like I worked a lot of hours at a catering job. That one I got because I started to make friends who were better connected. And the other job, I worked in the political science office because I wanted to be a poli-sci or international relations major. And I didn't end up doing that, but going to the department and looking for internships, looking for work that you connect to through your academic department, that's key. So I did that. Everyone should do that. That's where opportunities are going to come up, plus through my social network.
All right. For this next question, I know you already mentioned quite a few tips, but you did mention that you have a few jobs at USC. Now, what other tips besides networking and the resources you have on campus can you recommend for students who would like to find a job in college?
Well, there's the internet. But I think starting to get a sense of what you want to do for a career. And there's different ways to do that. There's personality profilers you can take. There's conversations with professionals who work in different industries. You have to take advantage of those opportunities. So that's going to the career fairs that are on campus, trying to meet people and asking them about what their job's like. How did they get into it? How much do they like it? Take advantage of those on-campus opportunities. And then everyone you meet, if they tell you like, hey, I'm willing to talk to you some more, don't be shy, take them up on it. And then you start to extend your social and your professional network. And you start to get a better sense as you ask people questions and really listen to their experiences. I did this, I think anyone can. I was slow to do it, and I wish someone had guided me through this when I was 18. But But then you start to get a sense of what you might want to do for a career. And that makes it much easier to narrow your focus, start to look for opportunities in 2 or 3 different industries while you're in college. So that's for internships, for jobs. You may not land your dream job while you're a sophomore in college, but you're going to get a clearer picture of what it is. And you start to make inroads into those industries or those specific companies where you're going to get work that you like, that pays you and helps you make ends meet while you're a student, and then leads to connections that help with your career.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing those tips. And the last question I have for you is, how did you adapt to being a college student?
Slowly. I adapted slowly to being a college student, learning to budget my time and figuring out, as I started to go to the library and got into my classes, figuring out what my deficits were. When I went to high school, or before, I should say before I started high school, I moved from a neighborhood that didn't have great schools in with my grandma to a much nicer neighborhood where I went to a really good high school. But it was still, a really good public school. And when I started to meet other kids who'd had a much more sophisticated high school education, I started to see what my deficits were. I ended up being an English major, and there's this whole field of English called literary criticism that I'd never heard of. So part of my adapting to be a college student was realizing I've got these big deficits, but I've also got this immaculate library. I can shore this up. I can ask for recommendations from my professors about where my gaps are, what should I be reading, what can I do to get better. It also took me a long time to feel comfortable going to professors' office hours. And some of this advice I think might be a little cliched, but I didn't have anybody to kind of sit me down and shake me and say, no, if you're feeling at all uncomfortable about the work, or you're feeling at all like there's other students in the class ahead of you, I needed to feel confident enough to say, I can catch up. But I need somebody to show me how to do it. I need to learn what to read, and I need a clearer understanding of what the resources are that are going to help me do that. So learning how to budget my money took a lot longer. Learning how to pursue the academic content that was going to help me catch up and feel confident and take part in any class conversation that came up and write better papers. That happened a little more quickly, but that still took more than a year.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for answering the interview questions I have for you. Now it's time to open up the floor to any questions our students might have. But before we do that, I want to just give you all some instructions on how you can ask questions. Well, first, you can ask questions by using the raised hand option. You can access it by clicking on participants, and the raised hand option should be right there. You will then wait for me to call on you, and then you can then unmute your mic. If you want, you can turn on your video so you can ask your question today. The second method is by sending your question through the chat. You can send it to the public chat, that is by clicking everyone on the participants, or you can send it directly to me. I am my counselor on the participants. So with that said, let's just start off with our questions. If anybody has any, let's go. Oh, there is a chat. Okay. We have a question from James. If you could do it over, what major in college would you have chosen?
I think if I could do it over, I would pick USC again. I would choose my major earlier. I probably would have double majored. So I dabbled in international relations and poli-sci, and then I switched to English. I was creative writing for a while, and then literature. I think I would have gone in pursuing the English major, probably creative writing from the beginning, and kept poli-sci or international relations in there. I had a couple of really good, inspiring professors, but I felt like I was getting more out of English, and that's why I ended up switching. Looking back on it, now knowing how important politics are or feel in my daily life, and a few of my other friends who've gone into jobs that were government relations and things that I really professionally I got exposed to, but I didn't know for another several years after college how much I would feel political science was important. At the time, it was all hypothetical. It didn't feel like it impacted my life, and that's why I switched to English. But that's how I do it over again. If I'd broadened my search and another school had offered me a full ride, I'd have been open to it. But I think going back, it would be USC, double majoring and committing to those majors much earlier so that I could have explored industry opportunities while I was still in school.
All right, awesome. James, let me know if that answers your question. In the meantime, are there any other questions that you would like to ask our guest? All right, in the meantime, while our users, our students go ahead and think of any questions they might have, I do have a question for you. How did USC prepare you for your career?
Oh, I feel like I got kind of lucky there too. So towards, I think my last semester, basically, I was thinking about what I was going to do for a career, totally uncertain. And I ended up volunteering in a tutoring program called the Neighborhood Academic Initiative. So this was a program which helped students with a background similar to mine, but they were in the neighborhood around USC, and they would come for tutoring every day after school on the weekends. And if they made it all the way through and got admitted to USC, they would get a full ride. That was back when USC wasn't handing out full rides as liberally as they do now for low-income students. So I was working with these, and I only ended up volunteering in this program because my girlfriend was doing it and I tagged along. But I noticed that these kids were getting great academic tutoring, but no test prep. So that time at USC in the Neighborhood Academic Initiative, I started building a SAT prep program for these kids from scratch, based on what I'd done to study for it in high school. And that was incredibly rewarding. I know there are more rewarding things to work on than test prep with students, but seeing that it was a deficit for them and the scores were still at that time really important, it really made me feel like, okay, this is what I want to do. I want to work in education. I don't know exactly how or what form. And then that led to my first, really my first jobs right after college were working for places like Kaplan and other companies in California. And eventually kind of getting to the level where I wasn't just designing content for, 10 kids in this little program at USC. I designed the SAT and ACT curriculum and the professional development, the instructor training program for SAT and ACT at Sylvan Learning Centers and at a couple of really big state and regional test prep companies. And if it wasn't for that experience, I'm not sure that I would have ended up doing the same type of work in my career. So lighting a fire under me to be work in education and getting that experience of building curriculum and then training other people to deliver it. I got that in a really condensed window at USC, but that's been a big chunk of my career since then.
All right. Thank you for answering the question. We do have a question in the chat from Jesus. Did you join any fraternities? If yes, what benefits come from joining and is it worth it?
So yes, I did. Yes, it was. This was my fraternity experience. This was a little different. So again, I mentioned like I walk into USC and there were moments that I felt like a fish out of water, even though my brother was another fish there too. I felt like only rich people go to college. I got over that. I got a better understanding. But then I got there and I thought, well, only rich people join fraternities. And then a guy from my high school was in one. And this was a nice group. Like, they weren't doing any of the crazy stuff that you see in movies or read about in papers when folks get in trouble. They were nice. A lot of them were nerdy like me, and they're on scholarship. They weren't rich kids. So that's the fraternity I ended up joining, Phi Sigma Kappa. And it was a great experience, partly because you're with a big group of roommates, you're pooling money. So you can live it's kind of dirty and everything. I mean, it's messy at least, but you have access to a lot more resources. Like I got to live in a house that had a basketball and a volleyball court. So for me, that was amazing. My favorite pastimes were playing pickup basketball, pickup volleyball. And I wouldn't have been able to do that if I didn't join a fraternity that had a big courtyard in the middle with access to sports. And, I think for a lot of people, they're meeting folks in their fraternity that they're going to network with professionally after they graduate. that wasn't as much on my mind because I didn't have parents who were professionals. Um, but it was a supportive network. Academically, we helped each other out. I don't know that that's everybody's fraternity experience, but that was mine.
All right, thank you for sharing. Are there any other questions for Dave? Go ahead and put them in the chat, or you can raise your hand and then I can call on you. I have another question. What did you like most about USC?
Probably the weather. Um, and the friends I developed. So I still have a core group of friends that I met at SC. Sometimes when we get together and hang out, we do act like we're 18 again, for better or worse. But those lifelong friendships that I made, if I'd gone to any other college, I would have had a different group of friends. I'm sure I would have loved them just as much and found those friendships just as rewarding. But there's something special. It's one of the reasons why, especially when I'm working with low-income students who think I need to go to a 2-year college first, I'll say, listen, you might end up getting more money, more scholarships, a better package if you go straight to a 4-year school. And the people that you meet your first and second year of college, even though USC could be a little cliquish, I got to meet a broad group of people from really different backgrounds. And for me, the weather, I can't overstate this. I stayed in LA for, forever after that and lived by the beach. The weather's amazing almost all the time. It would rain like 1 week a year, and that was it. That's how I remember it. And then one reason I had a diverse group of friends from really different backgrounds was playing a lot of pickup basketball. I can't tell you how much I loved being able to play as much basketball as I wanted every day for 4 years, except when I was injured. So people who I wouldn't have met in one of the social clubs or the academic clubs I was in, we wouldn't have all got together, but now there's like a big group of lifelong friends who that's what we came together around. So I don't want to say pickup basketball is my favorite thing about USC. It's more about my friends, but it's a great environment to, also because it's a big school, it was pretty inclusive. You end up meeting people, making friendships, and then that leads to getting introduced to their lifestyle, their communities. So for me, I have a much, I think, richer life because I met so many people who weren't like me and ended up staying friends with them for, hopefully the rest of my life after college.
All right, thank you. Any questions? Keep them coming. So I already asked a question about what did you like most about USC. Now I want to ask a question about what did you like the least about USC?
Being poor at USC was no picnic. I totally had enough money to get by. All my needs were met. And I'll say, as a low income student, I didn't come from extremely difficult circumstances like a lot of students I've worked with since then. But yeah, not having money and watching everybody go off and do fancy things, that's a little challenging. I wasn't jealous of them, but it just contributes to this feeling ugh, do I really belong here? Feeling a little embarrassed, your clothes, eventually I got a car, but not having a car at SC was rough. And, just being limited in what you can do. I should also say, this has nothing to do with USC, but I got a car, got a job working for a delivery service, and I was going to make great money. And then after my first day on the job, my roommate totaled my car. And I knew I couldn't sue his family to get the money from him to get a new car because his family was broke because the guy who totaled my car was my brother. So I had a couple of setbacks like that, but that one I can't pin on USC. But the reason I wanted a car so bad was because and I'd saved up for it, worked all these jobs to get it, was because, yeah, it's rough if your core group of friends doesn't have a car between them. It's limiting, and it makes you feel limited. But those aren't insurmountable obstacles.
Yeah. All right. So we have another question in the chat from James. How does USC attract rich kids to a neighborhood that seems dangerous?
A lot of marketing and PR, but also, a lot of security. There's a campus police force, which right now, the times that we're living in, that doesn't necessarily sound like an attractive feature, but there's a few things. One, they do keep the neighborhood in the immediate area around school relatively safe. I was mugged once the whole time I was there, and I'm not going to say it was my fault, but I was alone. Winter vacation, when almost everybody clears out. That's also when cars and rooms get broken into a lot on vacation or break. But to get back to the question, seriously, it's a very well patrolled neighborhood. So it feels safe when you're there. When you go on campus for an event, it's really impressive. It's beautiful. And I think another reason that a lot of rich kids go to a relatively dangerous neighborhood is tradition. There were so many people I met who loved USC, even if their parents hadn't gone there. But in a lot of cases, there's this also has kind of a bad rap now, but legacy students whose parents or grandparents went there. So there's all this school spirit, USC pride, that does a lot for getting families to commit. But when you go to visit, I remember in my day when the food options weren't quite as good there as they are today. But when families come in for investigating the school, parent day, what have you, the meals are amazing for that weekend. And then I'm not saying they go back to like ramen the next day, but the cafeteria is definitely, the quality of food goes down a couple notches when it's not a parent weekend. But the school spirit, the tradition, having winning sports teams, affects people's perception. And then the neighborhood itself, while you're there walking around, does feel safe and relatively beautiful.
All right.
And a lot of money spent on marketing.
Awesome. Any other questions?
I was going to say the other, and I'll take any questions as they come in, but the other thing that was tough for me while I was there, and this gets back to kind of school spirit and jobs and a few other things that we've talked about, but I went to one USC football game as a spectator. That was, the year before I went there. I had a host, spent the night with an RA in the dorms, went to a football game. It was pretty amazing. While I was there as a student, I went to a lot of football games, but it was while I was working for a catering company. So I'm at the Coliseum, making tacos and picking up trash. That was my, game experience. And I also catered the USC men's football team. So I was serving them not so great meals, but a lot of food, cleaning up, and then at the games, like working. So the USC men's football team lost to Notre Dame and UCLA, our two big rivals, all 4 years that I was there. So my school spirit and support for the team took a few years to bloom, to blossom. After that, when the team started winning more, I liked them more. But I also had this association, when people think of SC, I think the football team is one of the first things that comes to mind. So my interactions with them were a little different than everybody else's. I had to find other things that I loved about the school, but I mentioned some of those. And that was I think a key part of my USC identity was that labor, that work while I was there, tied to my school experience and definitely tied to my perception of the football team.
All right. We have a question in the chat from Eric. What was your favorite thing to do outside of campus, or did you stay on campus most of the time?
Yeah, I was locked into campus most of the time. So my favorite thing to do on campus was play basketball. Short answer. I liked other sports, but I'd never been in a place like that. Like, just since you asked, I'll get into it a little bit. The basketball courts there were some outdoor courts that were fine, a little beat up, but the Lion Center was open till I think midnight, and they had 3 courts. So depending on whether I was, a little bit getting over a sprained ankle or a torn ligament or some injury, I'd play on like the C court. When I was healthy, I'd move up to the B court. And then the A court, I'll keep this short because it's more about pickup basketball at USC than probably anyone on this wants to know. But at the A court, you had people who played Division I sports or were, the best basketball player in their state. And I would usually be the 10th worst player on the team. Even when I could still dunk, I was like the worst one on the court. But that was the most fun that I had at school. Partly because I really love basketball, as you might be able to tell, and because I started to make friends over the years. And there would even be people who I would consider a friend. I'd never hung out with them outside of the basketball court. But then after graduation, we kind of stayed together, found each other, got to know each other on a deeper level. But I had fun. It was great physical activity. You got to see why. I got to see why I was not qualified to play Division I sports and what my limitations were. And then playing against people who went on to become professional athletes, that was a lot of fun too.
All right. And this goes like on the same question that Eric asked. Like, I know like you said like you like to play basketball on campus. Is there anything like you recommend off campus, even though you weren't off campus so much?
The beach. If you can get to the beach, it's one of the main reasons I think to live in Southern California. I guess there's mountains too, but that really wasn't my thing. You can go in one direction and get to the mountains, the other direction and get to the beach. So you have access to all that, at least when LA and California's not on fire. You have access to all those things. And I grew up in Southern California, so for me, the beach was great, but I only got there a few times a semester. But that was probably my favorite thing off campus to do.
Okay, awesome. Any other questions?
Any other basketball related questions? I'm happy to go on with those all day.
Lakers or Celtics? That's from Jesus.
So now I live in Boston, so both. If they go to the finals, it's really hard. Lakers or Celtics, I root for 7 games decided by a buzzer beater.
All right.
Probably Lakers. But I have to say that quietly because, again, I live in Boston and people take their sports seriously here. Mm-hmm. It was funny in LA, like the Lakers could be in the finals and you feel like the whole city really cares, but LA is a big place and there's a lot of people in LA who just don't care at all about the Lakers. But it is fun when you're in town and not everyone, but streamers on the cars, flags on the cars. I do miss that about LA. So I hope the Lakers get back to the finals. I hope the Celtics do, even though it's going to be Miami.
Mm-hmm. All right. There's another question from Nick. This is not basketball related. Was USC your first choice for college?
Yes. And I will say I maybe didn't look as broadly as I could have. I wanted to stay close to home. I mostly was serious about schools in Southern California. I looked at schools for international relations mostly. So Claremont McKenna was my second choice. And frankly, they didn't give me as much money. And for me, that's what it came down to. If you were going to say I take out $10,000 or $20,000 or $40,000 in loans, that just was not going to be worth it to me. So the financial aid package was definitely going to be a deciding factor. But SC was also my first choice because as a really big school and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, I figured SC is going to be a good fit because no matter what I pick as a major or career, they're going to have it. It's going to be, good to great to exceptional quality in that major. And it's also a school that was really known for trying to, hook people up with careers. So those were the things that put it at the top of my list.
All right. Any other questions? We have around 10 to 15 minutes left, so quite some time for any other questions. Or raise hands. If you raise your hand, you can unmute your mic and you can ask your question to Dave directly. While we wait for other questions, I have another question. What do you think makes USC so unique?
A lot. The connection to the film industry is always there, and that's super cool. The location, even though, as we've said, the neighborhood isn't the safest in the world in most directions, but it's in LA. It's a dynamic, city, urban university. I love the neighborhood that it was in because I was working with kids from the neighborhood. So that to me was really special. The campus is gorgeous. The other thing is kind of cool about SC, if you're into sports, the rival school is crosstown. So having your rival, just a short drive away, that's kind of fun. That adds an energy to the place. During the weeks when USC and UCLA play each other in football, my time there's the big statue of Tommy Trojan, the school mascot, and it would get duct tape up, wrapped up in plastic, because one year UCLA students had flown over it and dropped paint on it from a helicopter. I know rivalries are always kind of fun, but when it's a crosstown rival, it adds a whole nother element to all the sports seasons. So that was great. And again, like I said, it's a big school, lots of top quality programs, and they've made a lot of strides in the last few decades to go from being a school that any rich kid could get into to one that has really high academic standards. And I do sometimes cringe when I see USC in the news, when I just read that headline and I look down to see if it's going to be another scandal. But they'll persevere. We'll fight on, as we say. But it's a great campus to just walk around. Gorgeous. The weather's almost always going to be nice. Those are kind of not as profound maybe as some other elements, but those things really make the time there go by quickly, but be wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also, while we wait for other questions, of course, keep them coming. Any questions about admissions, financial aid, about Dave's personal career, basketball, anything that you would like, go ahead and ask those questions in the chat.
Well, I'll add something about financial aid. And this, a year ago, this was a much cuter story, but Aunt Becky's kind of ruined it with the Varsity Blues scandal. So we did not bribe USC in any way, shape, or form. As I mentioned, we had no money, but what we did have, with my older brother going through the process of admissions and financial aid, we had to go up there several times. And every time my mom went into the financial aid office, it went from being this imposing monolith that intimidated us to we knew the people and the people knew us. So when we were kind of negotiating my brother's financial aid package, we didn't really negotiate it. They told us what it was, and we were very grateful, even though it was big loans and whatnot. But we learned about the process. We made connections, and every time we went up there, my mom would bake cookies or bread and bring that to James Vasquez and the other people in the financial aid office. So again, this was a cuter story before USC bribes were kind of a huge part of the news cycle, but that let us understand, like, the people who work in financial aid, they're human beings, they're empathetic, they care about students, and especially once you're admitted, they want to make sure that it works. And USC also has a huge endowment. They've got a lot of money. So no one should feel shy, no matter what your financial background is, about, and it's true of a lot of other schools too. But USC has demonstrated a commitment with its current policies that they want to make sure that if they admit you, you can afford it. They're going to make it work for you. But even starting there with that like really high, great baseline and great policies, there's still a human element. So I'm not saying everyone should bake bread and cookies and deliver that, but I am saying it probably won't hurt. For us, it was getting to know people directly, knowing them as human beings, knowing that I could call or my mom could call and speak to James Vasquez instead of, you know, just calling the financial aid office. It's not going to work out that way perfectly for everybody, but that mindset of not being intimidated, getting through to a human being, making sure they know your story, they know where you're coming from, especially right now where almost everybody's finances have either become terrible or become just much worse. That's an element that I think first gen students like me, you know, if I hadn't had a brother who was 1 year older and went to the same school, I would have had a different package and I probably would have had some loans.
Mm-hmm.
It also meant, again, I still had, you know, a couple years of high school left to focus on the things that I knew would matter most to getting me the scholarships and the aid package that I needed. So I've tried every year since then as I work with high school students and their parents to make sure that they understand that they don't sell themselves short. They don't pick a school just because it's cheaper than another one until they really understand how financial aid is going to work for them and their unique family circumstances.
Awesome. All right. I do want to ask one question. This is, I guess, more specifically for the class of 2021, for the high school class of 2021. And of course, if this is going to be the last question, but if any of you have any other questions that you'd like to ask Dave that you didn't have the chance to ask during the chat, of course, feel free to ask my counselor and we will try your best to answer your question. So of course, like as I mentioned, this is a question more specifically for the high school class of 2021. I guess from an alumni perspective and based on your experience, what do you think students should do in order to gain admission into the university now that the SAT/ACT is optional for the class of 2021?
Well, the test is optional. And I feel like on balance, the tests right now are doing more harm than good. So I think every school should either be test optional or test blind. But if it's test optional, then a good score can still help you. You know, the scores might help you get scholarships, even if they don't help you get admitted. No one should go take an SAT or ACT if it's putting themselves or their family in danger of catching COVID-19. So that's a bit of a struggle to give advice, but I will say stepping back from the test and saying, what can students do to make their application more competitive? One, write great essays, get comfortable, practice bragging about yourself and telling your story in a way that's compelling and highlights what you would bring to the university. Make sure that in your essays, whatever you're talking about, you as a student, you as a person, you've got to be the subject of those essays. Also, still taking rigorous courses. So even if you're at a school that might have been pass-fail last year with some or all of your grades, and you're not sure what's going to happen this year, you need to get the best grades that you can. And I know that's pretty standard advice, but I would also say, get to know the university, whether it's USC or another school that are your top choices. You need to make sure that what you have to say about the university and why you want to go there is not just something that anyone could find out on the internet in 10 minutes. So there are ways to research schools, reaching out to alumni, asking about their experiences more than just me. There are far more interesting USC alumni than me. But reaching out to alumni, asking about their experience, why they went there, why they liked it. Also, if you can, this isn't realistic for everyone, but really understanding why you want to pursue a particular major. And, you know, all of the faculty are listed. So you can, if you want to pursue economics at USC or engineering at Berkeley, whatever it is, you can see who the faculty are. You can see what their specialties are. You can get a sense of what you would learn if you went there and took their classes. That's another way for you to invest some time in two things. One, figuring out, is this really where I want to go? Can I get a sense of the school culture? Can I get a sense of what my academic experience would be like there? Will I be studying what I want from experts whose opinions matter to me? And that helps you in the admissions process, because if you know more about the school at a deeper level than students who are just saying, I want to go to a school with a great football team that's competitive and has good weather and 10 things I read in the guidebook about USC. Investing time to know the school means you'll be more competitive to get in. And if you do get in, you are much more likely to enjoy it, have a great experience there. So in addition to those things I mentioned for researching the schools, also research the clubs. Like if you've made yourself competitive in admissions, it means your extracurriculars that you do in high school are things you care about, things you enjoy, sports that you've become hopefully much better at, or an instrument you've learned to play profoundly well. Are you going to find those same types of things at the school? And can you investigate them a little bit? I mean, this is all 10 to 20 minutes of internet research that frankly most applicants don't do. So connecting what the school offers with the things you care about the most, projecting yourself by looking more closely at the majors and the people who run those departments, what have they published as an economics professor since COVID-19 came out. These are things you can find out without very much work that again help you understand, do I want to be there? Will I find things to do that I'm passionate about, that are fulfilling and that lead to the careers that I want? That sort of research makes you more competitive as an applicant, especially when there are some schools that aren't going to care very much about your test scores, and you might not even be able to take the tests safely. So that part of test option will make things more challenging, but potentially if you're not spending 20 to 60 hours fretting about the tests and working to boost your score, you can invest that time in more meaningful activities. Unfortunately, I have to add to that, a lot of students are still going to have to take the test depending on what state they live in and what the requirements are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. All right, thank you for sharing, and thank you for this interview, for this live Q&A. I'm going to share my screen just to give you all some ending notes. Okay. So again, thank you everybody. Thank you, Dave, and thank you everybody for joining us. Before I leave, and before we leave, we would like to let you all know to please download our Plexuss app on the App Store or Google Play. If you download our app, you'll be able to receive instant notifications. We will also very much appreciate it if you rate and review our app on the App Store or Google Play. If you really love this live Q&A, go ahead and leave us a rating and a review. We very much appreciate all the feedback y'all can give us. Chat with my counselor if you have any questions, or if you missed a question that you didn't have the opportunity to ask. You can go ahead and ask my counselor and we'll try our best to answer your question. You can also reach out about your specific journey to higher education. Plexuss Prime. Dave Moniz is our Plexuss Prime lead tutor, so you can go ahead and check out Plexuss Prime. Go to plexuss.com/prime to start a free 7-day trial. You'll gain access to unlimited one-on-one online tutoring and college advising for $9.95 a month. Invite your friends to Plexuss, invite your friends to join this site. Of course, we have a lot of college readiness resources available for you all. And of course, thank you everybody for joining us, and we will see you all in the next live Q&A. Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Karen. Thanks, everybody.